All right, we're back, and as the title will read, we're going to go over some of my custom-made fishing lures that I did a few years ago. Just going through the basement, take the ones off that I don't necessarily use, or the ones that I collect. Um, so if you guys notice that the light is down a little bit, I did that specifically because I can get a better reflection with the light on the lure, so you guys can see it, some of the detail in it, and see if it's three-dimensional, which we'll get into. So I grabbed just two lures for this video just to keep it short. But if you like to get into your own lure making, these are going to be two top water style musky lures. And the only difference really between a musky lure and a bass specific lure is going to be just the size. Obviously, something over 6 to 7 inches in length is going to be more geared towards the northern pike, larger northern pike, and muskies. And even some of the larger ones like this one here would actually work in offshore type situations, um, for like sea bass and that. Uh, Not that I live in that area, but this is a style that you could use in that area if you're fishing for those kind of fish. So since I got this one in my hand right now, this is considered a flap tail. You guys can barely see the blade because it is black. But it is a number 10 mounted on a swivel clasp and then into a screw eye. So this can be changed out for multiple different sizes. The intention is to have the length of the screw clasp and the blade, whatever size you put onto it, makes contact with the metal part of this shotgun shell. Now in this shotgun shell I do not have anything on the inside. It is hollow. For a simple purpose that this lure, even though it is 7+ inches long and almost 2 inches in diameter, this lure still only weighs 3 pounds. Now you're going to ask how I actually did that. Um, I'm going to show you the other lure real quick. This is the Remington. This is another flap tail design that is made out of wood. Now this happens to be basswood that has been drilled out, so the body is hollow towards the upper portion of the body, so all the weight is on the belly. So no matter how rough the wake is within the water or how rough the water is, it will still always float belly down. This one also has a French blade on the back attached in the same manner, just on a swivel into a screw eye hook. Instead of the shotgun shell, this is a 223 or 5.56 full brass with a brass blade. Um, Most of the places that I've fished myself, I've always had better luck with lures that use brass metal materials. The combination of those two metals making contact seems to carry a little bit farther. So if you're trying to cover a large area with a surface lure, say you're in 10 feet of water and you're working a weed edge, you can toss this up into the shallows and bring it out, and the sound will really transfer a long direction. So you can kind of keep your trolling motor speed up, and you can cover a large area because each pass, each retrieve of this lure is getting and attracting the attention of fish from a long distance away. This one is 1.75 inches in diameter, but this one is made out of wood. Even with the center drilled out, this one is right at about 4 ounces. All right. Now we'll get back to that one after I finish explaining this one here. This one is a flat tail with trailer hooks. So if you guys can see the bottom, that is not something new. There's a few makers out there, builders out there that use this trailing hook type of design. It is kind of shied upon because anytime the hook is really far away from the main body of the lure, the better chances are of that hook being swallowed deeper down into the fish's mouth. get into the danger areas, into the gills, and things like that. With surface lures, having the trailer hooks down like this, as long as they're behind the lure, the chances of them actually getting down into the throat is a little less. Also, the leading hook or the head hook is a larger hook diameter, and it is mounted closer to the body. So if the fish does come out here, that distance there is not enough to reach down into the throat of the fish and get into the gills and into the troublesome areas of where you would actually be killing them. This one is also a two-piece, as you guys can see, a two-piece flap tail. Now the larger blade, you can imagine this has got some weight to it. As this is going around, it's not necessarily going to just sit there and spin on the top of the water to make contact with the chromed out brass and the black chrome plate. It is going to drag down in the water a little bit and get that flash behind it. With all surface lures, whether it be prop style, flap tail, what you're going for is the largest profile that you possibly can on the top of the water. And I'm going to explain a couple different reasons why you want to do that. Now, if you're using like a stick bait, say if you were to have a bait or lure that's a pencil size diameter and it has all the hooks hanging down like this, as you drag that through the water, it does not present a very large profile to the fish in the surrounding area. The larger the profile is, the more that profile is going to stand out. And the faster the retrieve is, and the weight going along the body, it's going to break up that side profile. It's going to actually start to camouflage it. So with this being 2 inches diameter, lures that are 1 inch diameter, say like the Whopper Plopper, once you start to retrieve those, they actually promote a smaller profile on the top of the water, and sometimes that's not enough to provoke a larger fish to actually go after it. You can imagine, a twig that falls off of a tree that's just floating in the water. Most fish are not going to go after that. Something that's a larger profile and has action to it, so it has sound, flash, and movement, is what's going to spark that interest. Now on this lure here, this is one of my earlier editions. If I can get the reflection just right, you guys can see that even though they are clear coated, there is texture built into the scales of the lure. So even that reflection, that crosshatch reflection, when it's up on the water, when the sun reflects off of that area, it's also going to break up the edge. So the silhouette is not going to be as clear or as definite or defined. By adding a reflective scale pattern like this, you're breaking that up even more. So as the retrieve, plus with the paint pattern on there like that, this lure actually appears to be something that is 1 inch in diameter to the fish below. And obviously the deeper they are, the smaller the lure looks. I personally like to fish breakoffs that are usually at least 10 feet deep. So if you have fish or weed beds that are down at 9, 10, or deeper, when a fish is looking up, that one little Whopper Plopper style 1 inch bait doesn't seem like anything that a fish is really going to exert a lot of energy to go after. So the larger profile is going to be for that sunny day or a cloudy day with deeper water, say 10 foot to 20 foot of water, to bring fish that are holding down at the bottom up to the surface to get the lure. The other reason for that, not necessarily on this lure here, but on lures that I have the hooks that don't extend down low on this, or on low on the lures, when a fish bites onto a lure, obviously if it doesn't feel those sharp pointy hooks onto the lure, they like to grab a hold of it and turn right away. And if they feel any reason to let go, they'll spit it out. So you're counting on those hooks to actually get into the mouth of the fish. This scale pattern is done fairly easy, and where most baits, when they clear coat it, the self-leveling clear levels off everything and it makes it perfectly smooth. The way you can get that texture to it is that after you've applied your first coat layer of clear coat over the paint to seal it in, you can take fiberglass mesh. Okay, you're going to find it in your automotive parts stores. Not the white fiberglass itself, it's fiberglass mesh. It usually comes in a roll. That's what this is here. So what you do is put on your second coat of epoxy, lay that down, and mat it down like you were applying fiberglass or fiberglass resin over a fiberglass matting. Mat it down so it gets in there, and that epoxy will swell over the top of it and seal it in, but it'll leave a texture to the lure. So if you're building a fish jerk bait or like a glide bait, and a fish comes up to it and grabs it, it feels that texture in the lure just like it would if it was a real fish. So not only are you trying to appeal to the eyesight of the fish, the action, the color, it's also once the fish grabs a hold of it, if they feel anything, now imagine a musky or northern, their palate is nothing but small teeth, and when they bite down on something, if it's like biting onto a nice smooth piece of chrome, they intend on letting go and spitting it out. If there's something there that they feel when they bite down with their teeth, to where their teeth can actually sink in a little bit, it just triggers them to clamp down more onto it, and you have a better chance of hooking up. Now with this lure, like I said, it's fairly large, 2 inches diameter, it's over 7 inches, almost 9 inches with the shotgun shell. But as a surface lure, this lure is intended to promote a larger profile on the surface of the water with lots of action. With the heavier blade, it really causes the tail to drag back and forth. So you don't have to go very fast, and the lure does the action for you. You don't have to sit there and whip the end of your fishing rod or spool it with the reel itself to get the action. You just do a steady, controlled retrieve, controlling the speed of where this rides on the surface of the water without going under, and the lure does the rest. At those speeds, with my testing of all the different lures that I've tried out, with this design and the speed for this lure to float the way that it is intended and I built it to do, most of the strikes come up towards the rear section, or by the time the fish goes for it, they're at the rear section or trailing right behind, and they try to clamp down on this area. That is where these lower hanging treble hooks come into play. Most of the time, they don't T-bone this lure. They're usually coming up from behind it, or they go right for the head. Okay, so that is the reason why the hooks are positioned in the place that they are now. On top of the detail that I put into the scale area, this lure is also not made out of wood. I believe I'm the only bait builder that builds lures out of foam. Guys that are watching this can be like, what do you mean foam? That's never going to hold up. I use an industrial foam that actually comes from Smooth On Products. It's a machinable expanding foam that literally a little teaspoon of the material mix will give you a cylinder approximately 10 inches long. It'll expand that much into a pre-sized mold, and then you can carve it and shape it just like you would wood. It's easy enough, soft enough that you can actually shape it just using sandpaper. And that's exactly how this one was made. In order to get the joint to match up just right, it is basically just a piece of sandpaper wrapped around a 1 3/4 inch piece of PVC pipe, and that way when you sand it down, there's no guesswork. The inside curve of the front portion of the lure and then the rear portion of the lure, you can sand that back as much as you want to get the extremity of that movement to match to whatever you're liking. That is how you keep the weight down on these. And with all the hardware basically being on the bottom, they do have eye screws in them that go all the way up to the middle of the body. And then the leading eye hook goes all the way through the main section of the body to the top connection point of the hinge. So all the hardware is directly connected to the line tie. It is not being directly put on just the leaders or the split rings. All that weight is being transferred up into the line. It is not being stressed out onto the lure. That way you can get away, so a line through lure, you can get away with using other materials other than wood, and you don't necessarily have to glue everything in. With using the foam, you have to be specific about the primer coat that you put on here. You can't just put any material on it because sometimes the foam, it will actually eat the foam away. So one of the other products that I use to seal in my foam lures is called the Epsilon. It is a high impact plastic. You can put it on very thin, and it's enough to seal that foam in there to the point where you can literally drive your truck over the top of this, and it's going to bend the hooks and the wire line, you know, the shotgun shell and all the metal pieces. But the styrofoam, I shouldn't even call it styrofoam, the small cell foam is going to be strong enough with the epoxy and the Epsilon that it won't do any damage or crush the actual lure. Okay, so that's the split body surface lure for muskie. A lot of guys are very intimidated by this size of lure, thinking I can't throw nothing that big, or because of all the different pieces and hooks on here that when you go to throw it out there, you're going to get all kinds of tangles. With the heaviest portion of the lure actually being this blade, from my hand backwards, with a bait casting reel set with just a little bit of tension on it, when you toss this out there, it definitely flies through the air tail first. I never seem to get any kind of tangles within my line unless I'm actually catching fish, or if I get a snake on a log or something like that and I'm jostling it around, then yes, obviously, but you're going to get that with any kind of surface lure. All right, let's go on to the Remington here. I got to be careful with this one. I forgot that I didn't have my hook protectors on here. The Remington follows a lot of the exact same ideas behind the previous lure. It is also larger in diameter. It is a rear section flap tail with a solid brass, but it does not have the trailing hooks. This lure, because of the weight and the size of the tail, the buoyancy of this lure matches the buoyancy of the solid foam, but it is a little bit heavier, obviously being wood. But the same ideas apply as far as creating a profile on the top of the water. The larger, wider head portion gives the fish a larger target to lunge at, and as it goes to the back, it starts to narrow down just like a natural fish does. In that situation, most of the time, the strikes go at the head, or again, come straight at the back and go towards the back. So having that trailing hook towards out of the way without getting tangled in any kind of your hardware, but far enough back that if the fish clamps onto the back, or if you're going a little bit faster than than the fish likes it, you're still going to get that hook set. Another thing with this being a wooden lure, I've dealt with all kinds of making different kinds of eyes, and hopefully you guys can see this one here. This side might be a little more prominent. You guys can see this lure actually has moving pupils. And where guys that paint the eyes on or use crystals, that pupil does not actually move. Now, with this being a surface lure, it does not run perfectly just on top of the water. It runs basically to where the point of the water comes over the head, and then this portion of the lure is actually sticking out of the water. That's how you know you're going at the right speed for the retrieve. That is all built and designed into the lures to work with this style of flap tail. These eyes are also three-dimensional. I'm going to give you the belly angle here if you guys can see. Okay, in order to make eyes, three-dimensional eyes like that, you need to drill all the way through the lure. Okay, creating a smaller hole the size that you want the pupil to be. And then come with your larger drill bit to create the pocket of where that epoxy is. Okay, now you fill up that hole with epoxy and block off one side. So you're creating a tunnel in through the lure, filling it with epoxy again, and then you come out with a pocket where in between they're both sealed. Now this is the kind of the tricky part. These eyes are actually created by controlling the drip of a fast cure epoxy. So one of the most popular epoxies I use is the 2-ton epoxy. The 2-ton epoxy is a 5-minute cure. Once you mix those up, you have to do one eye at a time, because obviously you're going to be constantly tilting your lure to control how much of that epoxy starts to cone out. Right, so if I fill in that cavity with epoxy, I'm actually going to tip it like this and watch the drip of that epoxy. And I'm going to constantly be for 5 minutes until it's fairly set up to the point where it's not going to level out anymore. You keep tilting the lure just like this. Okay, then you let it sit for at least 30 minutes to completely cure, and then you can do the other eyeball and go through the process again of tipping it back and forth. And that way you're getting a completely transparent eyeball and the tunnel that goes through the body. So if the sunlight's over here and it goes through it, it's actually transparent all the way through. But that eyeball will actually start to move, and the retina will move. Visual effects, right? Whether or not the fish can see it or not, probably not. But if you're trying to sell to fishermen and try to come up with a unique style to your own, that is how you do that. Okay, that's not a ball bearing or anything like that inside of there. That is an optical illusion through a prism, basically, of the eyeball and the epoxy, the shape of it, and then having that darker transparent color. See if you can see it through here with the light. Well, it's not going to let me do it with this one, but this one here is a 2-dimensional paint job. I did not use the wire mesh. This is the laundry basket type mesh paint job. It's basically a white primer base, and then you paint from the inside out. So you start with in this case, I start with the greens, with a flat green. Then I use the color shift green, waited that for it to dry, then put on the netting, clamped it on, then did a black run down the middle of the back, and then I put the gold flake on top of that. Now, if you really want to get a 3-dimensional look to the scales without having to use a 3-dimensional effect, all you want to do is add a layer of clear epoxy in between each layer of paint. And that's going to give you the depth between each layer, and it's going to make the lure appear to be 3-dimensional, actually have scales, even though it is smooth. With this one, obviously I just did the paint and then clear coat over the top of it. And again, being wood, this one's a little bit heavier. It's 3.5 ounces, so it's still castable. Again, majority of the weight is towards the back, with the eyes being drilled out. Majority of the weight's from my hand back. And again, with a good control of a bait casting reel, you can cast this out no problem, and it will always stay belly down because the bottom portion of the lure is still solid wood and all the hardware is on the bottom. So that's the Remington. Those are the two that I grabbed for right now, so I'm limited on time. So that's going to be 30 minutes for 2 lures, and I know that seems like a lot. I'm going to be breaking it down into different specific lures, with this being the flap tails. If I have flap tails that are similar in design, I'm going to be skipping those. I'm going to go to the ones that are drastic, that might have something designed into the lure Or if I have a group of lures that are built similarly, I'll be using those for the short 30-minute videos. This one is about the third one that I've made using the foam. I did a replica squirrel that mimicked this exact same shape. I had carved the front and actually added ears to it, and then I actually used a real squirrel tail for the back end of it. I still have that lure. It was the first lure I ever did with the foam, so that's the collector's. This is my insignia, guys, so if you guys ever find lures at a meet, this is the Tinted Lip Fishing custom lures. So pretty much all my lures so far, 99.9% of them have all been specific lures or one of a kind. I have made duplicates, but those duplicates have gone to the same person. So they'll buy two, one for display and one to actually use. So they have that collector, and then if they catch a fish on it, they can use the display one for their wall mount and have that lure hanging in the fish in the mouth for their wall mount. But most of the people that have ordered from me, they have an idea, a specific body of water, specifically mostly musky fishing, and they'll tell me what style of fishing they do, what time of the day they like to go fishing, what time of the year they like to go fishing, what they're fishing out of, the type of gear that they have, and their targeted style of fishing. Now that's going to sound really different, but each fisherman has their own style of fishing. Not all musky fishermen fish the exact same way. A lot of your weekend warriors, their interest to keep focused on a lure is going to be a topwater lure, because they can actually see what the lure is doing, and if fish is anywhere in the vicinity, they can see the attack. Whereas in a subsurface lure like a bucktail or a jerkbait, all they're doing is looking at that glare off the water and going off of their senses of their hands to feel the strike. You do that all day long and it starts to become monotonous, and you get that, that black dog syndrome like truck drivers do. You start to zone out, you lose concentration. Where surface lures, you can see the lure going, you can adjust your retrieve for speed, you can change angles. If there's some lily pads or something like that, you can arc them around the lily pads, or if you know there's some bottom structure, you can work the lure around. So it gives you a couple of different things to focus on. That's mainly the style of surface lures that I make, to keep the fishermen interested in what they're doing and to spark a strike from fish that might be in high pressure areas. These larger diameter lures like this are definitely high pressure areas, where everybody else is throwing smaller lures or really fast lures. You can chug this one along. You can even drag it behind the boat. Say you're just drifting across the lake or something like that, and you throw this out on the end of the line as you're sitting down, maybe just munching on a sandwich or something like that. This one, that little speed going across is going to have enough action, and you can be fishing at the same time that you're taking a break. You'll be surprised how many strikes you actually get off of a lure like this in that circumstance. Whereas the heavier lures, again, you're going to need to have extremely good, dedicated, heavy-duty equipment to be tossing 4-ounce or heavier lures. I do have heavier lures. We'll get into those in the next video, but this is just the topwater flap tail design. The next video will be on rear prop style lures. So with that, stick around. We'll catch you guys later.